Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Morris Museum. I hope you all had a great day yesterday. It was wonderful to see the museum so lively and so much going on and such amazing works on display for everybody. It's an absolute pleasure to introduce this morning's first speaker. I'm blessed to be a museum director because one of the great things about my job is everywhere you work, you have someone on your staff, if you're looking more than one, who is absolutely fascinating. And you get the perk of being director is to be able to go down to their office whenever you want and just ask them to fascinate you. And they always have something to do, they always have something to tell you. And I was thinking this morning about introducing him. The last time I introduced him was on a Zoom presentation we did with another museum. And I remember a few minutes in, looking at his background and thinking, that's such a cool background he found for his Zoom. And then I realized it was actually his office. So that says a lot about the person you're going to hear next. He is known to you all here. He's our conservator of the Guinness Collection, but he knows I refer to him as the museum's magician. It's my very big pleasure to welcome Jere Ryder.
Welcome, everybody. One of the questions just to start off that I usually get is how did I start in this field? What my background was. And it all boils back to our parents. Between my brother, my sister, and myself, our parents started collecting mechanical musical instruments when before I was born. So we grew up in an apartment with music boxes around the floor in every little nook and cranny, crawling around them, and not being afraid, and being very familiar at an early age with clockwork-driven mechanisms. And that later on in life just kept snowballing, you might say. And it preoccupied most of my time. Through junior high school and high school, repairing pieces, modern music boxes that were being imported from Switzerland and sold in the New York metropolitan area. So one thing led to another, and I just got more into the antique pieces and then working and repairing for dealers around the New York metropolitan area, and then studying in Switzerland with an automata restorer and a successor to the Vichy firm, which was one of the big makers of automata, one of the big six in Paris, France in the 1800s, right into the early 1900s. So it was a pleasure to learn the old school way of how these pieces were made. Because whenever you're working on them, it's always a challenge to sort of reverse engineer how they were put together in order to disassemble them or get far enough into it to do the repair and conservation treatments that some of the instruments need in order to justify their operation. And as we all know, the magic happens when these pieces work. That's when the light bulb goes on and little children, when they watch an automaton actually in action, how does this little figure come alive? All the way up to adults and the fascination of that replication of human life and life around you, the animals, which leads me to my talk on the birds, the feathers, and birds of a feather, and the different makers that were making these pieces back in the late 1700s on through. You may wonder why we can go into the talk, I think, Jimmy. Okay. Singing birds. There was a fascination in the 1700s, probably even the late 1600s, with the possibility of training one's home pet canary or songbird to actually sing a human melody. So the very first slide, when it comes up, is basically a depiction of that early period of time. I think it's a painting by Hogarth in the 1700s that shows a very wealthy family, a group of children from a very wealthy family, actually showing the operation of one of these serinets, a mechanical musical device, no bigger than 12 inches square, most of them, that actually is a miniature pipe organ. And they were pinned with human melodies in a very simple form, only about 8, 10, 12 notes, was meant to play repeatedly to your pet songbird in a cage or pet canary in order to actually learn that human melody. And it was a parlor amusement, you might say, and a social sort of an event.
Did it ever work?
Excuse me?
Did it ever work?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah, it was very successful. Stand by. Yeah, it was very successful for over a century as an amusement, a talking point, and an activity in the more well-to-do family settings.
Particular species of birds?
Nope.
Were particular species of birds more likely to mimic?
I'm sure there were. I'm not exactly sure what types of birds were more attuned to mimicking, but then they bounce back and forth.
Is the switch on?
Is the switch on?
On the side, red or green?
There we go. There we go. Okay, this is 17 Hogarth painting with a little boy, the gentleman there with a relatively fancy serenette that he's cranking. And they're all enjoying it while the bird up in the cage is supposedly learning that simple human melody that it can take on. And then it can bounce in between and repeat simple human melody as well as its natural bird song. Of course, the cat has other intentions, and we're not sure what the end result of this sitting was, but it's a humorous and very well-known painting. Interesting thing on the left-hand side is that's a musical clock as well, very popular in the mid to late 1700s. That is obviously a musical clock because of the grill work on the sides of it meant to let the sound out. No idea who actually made it, but there were Jacques Dreux and Cox and a whole number of others in London and in Switzerland were making a whole variety of those types of pieces for the very well-to-do and high society. This is a picture of a serenade that we have on exhibit in the Guinness collection. We have actually another one down below in storage, and we have extra music barrels because these instruments were made so you could shift out what the melodies were, much like a much larger street organ. See, this one's a little bit more elaborate with 2 ranks of pipes, I think it is back there. But they sound very crude, but that's exactly what they were meant to do, is do a very simple melody, something simple that could be taken on and replicated by the bird itself. This evolved in the late 1700s with the Industrial Revolution and the clock and watch field and the miniaturization of mechanisms, very elaborate mechanisms, to replicate that song, that mechanical songbird melodies. Sometimes they were made to play human melodies as well, but they became much more elaborate. This is the Maison Jacques Dreux in Le Chaux de Fonds, where he was born in the early 1700s, where it was a kingdom of Prussia at that time. Le Chaux de Fonds didn't revert to Switzerland until the Federation was happening in the early 1800s. So this is what they basically called the cottage industry, because it would not only be a homestead for the family that had known that community or lived in that community, but usually the ground floors were also set up as workshops where these very elaborate pieces that the Jacques Dreux, Mayer-Day, Leschaud, Frisard were manufacturing for sale for the very high society and the landed gentry at that time. So this shows this is an early depiction of his residence with workshops on the lower level. Jacques Dreux was one of the instrumental early people, as you know, in historic automata, having created the writer, the draftsman, and the musician, which he traveled. What Jacques Dreux did, which was pretty revolutionary, just before designing and building these pieces, was to take his wares, very precious small musical watches, musical brooches, clocks, and pocket watches, beautiful Geneva and Swiss enamel work on the outside, and gorgeous mechanisms that his workers and himself were creating in Le Chaux-de-Fonds. And the mayor of Neuchâtel in Switzerland said, you must go to Madrid, you have to show this to the court in Madrid, and there's customers there for this. And he made arrangements, and it was about a 30-day travel between Le Chaux-de-Fonds, Switzerland, and Madrid, in a custom carriage outfitted to take very delicate objects over the road for 30 days to get to the destination. And then he had to wait 2 months for a sitting in order to present the pieces to the courts, to the very landed high-end courts that were going to be his end customers. In Madrid, ultimately successful. They purchased everything that he brought. So he went back home to Geneva after that visit with a very rich purse and an empty carriage. And that precipitated, that success of selling those wares allowed him to actually start to fabricate these pieces, which were a dream of his, an idea that he wanted to move forward on. So that was a huge step towards automata that we are used to, and traveled all over Europe. These 3 pieces were the draw cards. He would set up appointments with high society in Paris, in London, in the Netherlands, in Spain, and then invite like Louis the 14th or 16th in and his court in order to see these pieces. And then along with them were all the normal wares that he was able to sell and market. So these were the draw cards, the amazing automata that were replicating life in miniature, writing, drafting, as well as playing music, were the draw cards for what his normal merchandise was. Great salesman. Normal merchandise on the high end included singing bird cages such as this piece, meant to be hung with a clock face on the bottom side of the cage. Very elaborate clockwork mechanism just behind the timepiece, above the timepiece, that actually is a miniature pipe organ inside of it with turning glass rods to imitate waterfalls inside, while you've got 1 or 2 birds on perches up above, batting their wings, singing, turning from side to side. This is a piece that very relatively recently, only about 3 years ago, came over from Europe and was sold to a collector in Long Island. It was one of the most elaborate pieces by Jacques Dro that we've seen. Definitely made for the Asian market, Turkish or Asian market, but it does have the clock on the bottom side, but it also has 3 tiers of waterfall, which is the most elaborate that they could have manufactured, all animated on each tier. Plus, in the little cupola right at the very top, there's a small butterfly. We have sound? Other pieces in that Jacques Dro workshop, well, the Jacques Dro workshop, it employed and basically brought through the ranks several of its employees, went off and did their own thing. Frere Rochat was not one of them, but he was one of Jacques Dro's sort of competitors or successors after that popularity in the late 1700s. Jacques Dreux actually had employed in his shop there in Le Chaux-de-Fonds, Jacob Frisard, which his pieces are standalone, exceptional miniaturization of animated figures with singing birds and moving figures within them, as well as Frederick Leschaux. Leschaux is credited early on with the invention of the slide whistle, which simplified and advanced the singing bird mechanisms dramatically, allowing them to go from a small pipe organ into a cam-driven, like a whoopee whistle, with a slide piston, so that one cam could position the piston to whatever note needed to play in that whistle. And then the other cam would control how frequent and when the valve for the airflow would happen. So that was an exceptional invention that advanced the singing birds, the variety of singing birds like crazy, simplified and made them very cost efficient to manufacture. Rochat was one of early Jacques Dreux competitors, made some exceptional pieces in Geneva, Switzerland, and miniaturization and pop-up singing birds like bird pistols, as well as cane heads and small sometimes singing birds in pocket watches and such. In the Guinness Collection is a very early by Piguet and Capt musical ring. This is also animated. Underneath that bezel is a ring you can wear, and it has a small slide on the side. You can move the slide that automatically winds it, and when you release it, it starts the music playing. A very simple, about 5 notes on a cone playing music box inside of it, as well as an animated scene. And here, it actually is an automata, a musical automata ring that is depicting on the scene underneath the bezel of a beautiful woman who's turning the crank on a serenette. And the musician is, the fellow standing alongside her is holding a violin underneath his arm and keeping time with the violin bow. And behind him, just behind his head, you can see the bird up in the cage. It's a painting. The bird's not animated, but his arm moves as well as the woman is turning the crank when it's operating and the music is playing. Bon temps happened just a little bit later. It progressed, and that sliding whistle type mechanism that Leschaux had invented was becoming extremely popular. And Bon temps, one of the big 6 of the Parisian manufacturers of automata, really specialized in singing birds. Sometimes there's whole arbors of trees and birds and hummingbirds flitting from branch to branch, as well as singing. Sometimes they combine timepieces. He made a very wide variety of singing bird pieces. This is one that's on permanent exhibit in the Guinness Gallery, and it's in our videos, typical of the pieces that were made in that circa 1880, 1900 type period. Other ones that are also bon temps in the permanent exhibit that you've seen there. The cage on the left-hand side, it's deceiving because there's no scale there for size, but that's close to 2.5 feet wide, 1.5 foot deep, and close to 3 feet in height, to almost about 32 inches in height. The singing bird, a Perrin, I brought that from the Guinness storage area down below in Guinness Viewable Storage without the glass fruit, but I'll be able to demonstrate and answer questions about these pieces at the end of the talk. This is found both a 1-tier, it's Baccarat crystal, so it has a beautiful ring to it, it's high lead content glass. And Bon temps made this in a 1-tier, 2-tier, and 3-tier piece, and the 3-tier piece is close to 4 feet tall. The surprise within the pineapple is the singing bird. Bon temps mechanisms were also used by a few of the other big 6 automata makers there in Paris, like Vichy, Gustave Vichy. Many of these houses are known by the owner's name, like Fallobois, Henri Fallobois, Gustave Vichy, Henri Triboulet, Leopold Lambert, but but they didn't do it alone. They had workers alone, working in their workshops. Vichy at one time had as many as 60 employees, they say, according to record, which would be exceptionally successful during the late 1800s, and really denote a high production number of these pieces. And when we do, when repair people or conservators are working on them, usually find on the inside of the paper mache body a numbering, and in pencil there's a number. And they usually set them up and try to create them in series. And the most popular, you might find a number all the way up to 12. So we figure that once they were set up and they had a mold out and they're making the pieces or machining the cams, once you're set up, like anybody who manufactures these pieces, one-off is the worst possible efficient way to do it. Once you're set up and you have the machines and everything, you make multiples at one time. And then as the orders come in for a successful idea or model, then you start to assemble the pieces and do the rest of the custom work necessary. So this is a very unusual piece, very rare today. I think there's only about three originals known to exist, and so popular that there are a few reproductions out there as well. I think this is a video. There we go. As you heard, there was a music box inside of that. All that mechanism is hidden inside of his chest. There's a hollowness. Most of the bodies of the automata are made of paper mache. They're hollow on the inside with an animation plaque of steel that is sort of the linkage. The linkages go up to the animation plaque, and then via levers and bell cranks, it goes out to whatever feature of that automata or appendage needs to move. On this particular piece, that clockwork mechanism hidden inside of his body also incorporates a bellows and part of the bon ton singing bird mechanism, like the cams, in order to control the slide whistle and the song, the memory for the song that's going to be playing back. And of course, the bird itself is a bon ton singing bird. Underneath it, you can see exactly that it wasn't replicated by Gustave Vichy. He didn't copy. He actually was purchasing pieces to incorporate within his own from bon ton factories. So you get these sometimes marriages of if somebody else is doing it, why reinvent the wheel? Just go to the source where you can source the right material. It's well proven.